Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the world's most exciting classroom. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Galapagos Week is moving along. In fact, we are in our final day of live events. We're going to start off here at the Charles Darwin Research Station, and then later this afternoon at 2:30 Galapagos time, which I believe will be 4:30 Eastern, we will be live on the Oosterschelde, and we are going to do a Spanish event for classrooms, local classrooms and Spanish-speaking classrooms around the world. We'll do that at 2:30 Galapagos time. Well, it's been a great week. It's been so great to have all the classrooms along with us. I'm just trying to think about some of the events that we've done in the last little while. You may remember at the beginning of the week, we were out there in Academy Bay, and we were at the public docks, and we did 2 live events with the wildlife on the docks. So we saw marine iguanas, we saw little sharks, we saw pelicans, frigate birds, blue-footed boobies, the sea lions up on the dock. It was a jam-packed time just on the public dock. We've been on the ship for live events, sailing to Bartolome. We were out in the field yesterday in the highlands with the giant tortoises. We had Sarah Darwin with us, and lucky for us, we have her joining us today at the research station. So if you look over my shoulder, you will see some of the buildings of the Charles Darwin Research Station here in the background. They do incredible research, incredible conservation work, incredible education here in the Galapagos Islands, here on Santa Cruz. And so we're really lucky. In a little bit, I'll introduce Rakan, the executive director of the Charles Darwin Research Station, who will join us today, tell us a little bit about the history of the station, a little bit about some of the research, some of the conservation. Of course, we're going to save lots of time for your questions. So we'll save a little bit of time at the end. If you're tuning in live with us, use the chat sidebar, send us in some questions, and then we will work some of those in. So let's get right into it. I want to show you what I'm seeing right now. So I'm going to switch my camera view here. And I think you guys deserve to see my view. I'm not going to hog it all anymore. There we go. So if you look over there, there's Sarah. Good morning, Sarah. How are you doing today? I'm going to pass my microphone off to you, Sarah. There you go. And then rocking there in the background, in the swell, we have the Oosterschelde. They're going to have to move it in a little closer to shore soon, I think, because they're getting quite a bit of sway back there. But you should be able to see our historic, beautiful, 3-masted tall ship there in the background. Very, very cool. Academy Bay. Well, Sarah, we were out with the tortoises yesterday, which was an absolute blast. And then in the afternoon, we went through the lava tunnels. That was pretty cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So much to see here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going around and we visited different places. I've been on a few different islands. We've talked to different guides, and we've kind of just touched on natural selection. So I think what we need to do today is to dive a little bit deeper into it. And I can't think of anyone than to have you right here with us. So we saw some examples. We talked about the tortoises yesterday and about how Darwin wrote in his journal how he learned that it was almost a brag that you could tell the difference between tortoises and which island they came from by their kind of distinct features. We talked about the prickly pear cactus, how on islands without predators, they're more like scrubby bush. But then on Santa Cruz, we saw the big tall ones because the tortoises predate on them. So, Sarah, I would love it if we could talk a little natural selection.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's no better place on the planet to talk about natural selection than in the Galapagos Islands. This place, we can actually see evolution taking place. It's absolutely extraordinary. So when Darwin was here, as we said yesterday, he was talking to the Governor Lawson about the different shell shapes of the giant tortoises. But he also went to 4 different islands in the Galapagos, and he collected 3 different species of mockingbirds. And crucially, he could see that the mockingbirds were similar to the birds from South America, but were slightly different, and really began to make him question the stability, as he called it, of species. You know, was there change taking place, or were they created as they were? So that was the next little seed that sort of entered his mind. And then over the next year, he came up with a little bit stronger suggestions in his diary. And finally, in 1837, he wrote this section in his Transmutation. Those are his evolution books. And he drew a tree of life showing how some species went extinct and some carried on. And he wrote a very tentative "I think" next to it. So I'd like to distill down into basically 4 things. three crucial things for evolution by natural selection. And we have to remember here that evolution takes place on populations, not on species and not on individuals. And I'll explain to you why. So Darwin was taught before he went on the voyage of the Beagle to look at variation within a species. So if you look at humans, we all look slightly different. Some are taller, some have blue eyes, some have dark hair. We all have differences. We're all the same species, but we have differences, and that's variation. That's what Darwin was seeing in so many different things here. And we have inheritance. Darwin at the time didn't know what DNA was. We all now know that there's this chemical that we inherit from our biological parents, and these variations, these little differences that we've got, we inherit. And then finally, there's a struggle for existence in the wild. If you have an oak tree, it might have thousands of acorns every year, but not all of those little acorns are going to germinate, and maybe only one or two will actually form a big tree. And this is the struggle for survival. And once you have these three different forces at play, it forms natural selection in wild populations.
All right, excellent. So Sarah, I really want to ask, you mentioned the mockingbirds, and I think when people hear about Charles Darwin, we always hear finches, finches, finches. But, you know, I know from what I've heard that it was larger than that. The mockingbirds played a role in seeing kind of the different species, the tortoises on the islands. So maybe you could tell me if this story that I've heard has a little truth to it, that initially he didn't really label the finches.
No,
well.
he didn't, unfortunately.
Spread out.
Yes.
So later he was kind of scrambling around.
He really didn't understand the finches at all. He didn't realize that they all belonged to one group. He mislabeled them. I mean, I think it must have been horrendous for him when he realized what he'd done. But he was incredibly careful with the plant collections. I think he collected around 180 plant species new to science in the Galapagos. At least half of those were only found in the Galapagos Islands, and quite a few of them, like I think 80 of them, were only found on individual islands. And he was really, really careful with that. And as you say, with the mockingbirds, he was really careful. Yeah. So those were actually the stories that he told in The Origin of Species. He doesn't mention finches. Yeah. There's the finch story. Oh, look, there's a pelican.
Oh, there you go. Hey, buddy.
The stories, he didn't mention the finches on The Origin of Species. The stories of the finches really came much later in the 20th century when Lack wrote about the finches, and the incredible couple, Rosemary and Peter Grant, here in the Galapagos, did something like 30 years of experiments on the finches, and they began to realize that we've got this adaptive radiation, which is a really special thing. If you want me to explain, I can just quickly. Yeah. So the idea is that from somewhere, nobody's quite sure where, possibly the Caribbean, possibly South America, a flock of finches arrived on the islands. And remember, they were, you know, initially these islands that we see now, they're clothed with wonderful plants and cacti. Once upon a time, they would have been bare larvae. And this little population maybe got swept off there, you know, in the wind or something. They arrived in Galapagos, and very soon natural selection started working on any little variation that occurred in these finches. And if a finch had a very slightly stronger beak, it might have been able to crack a nut. If it had a very slightly longer beak, it could pull grubs out of tree bark or out of the ground. And so natural selection started working on these variations, and you find that the finch offspring, so the biological parents for the offspring, inherited that slightly longer beak or that slightly stronger beak. And very soon there was this struggle for existence that I talked about, where the one with the strong beak could crack the nuts. And if there wasn't that much rain and there wasn't much to eat, then suddenly this one with the strong beak would be really successful.
Amazing, Sarah. We're going to have you back in for a little Q&A shortly, but thank you so much for that just perfect description of natural selection. And I really like that we clarified that story, because we do always hear finch, 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 and yes, it was important, but it was a whole collection of observations, plants, some of the animals he collected that really kind of put that idea together. Very cool. All right, Jesse, if you want to queue up, we're just going to switch around here a little bit. Why don't we take a look at a little tortoise video while we get ready to have Rakan come and join us, and we'll talk a little bit more about the station.
Fantastic. Look like we're almost queued back up with Joe and the gang on the island. You got a chance to see some of the incredible tortoises on the Galapagos
Jesse, can you hear me?
This is all footage we've been capturing over the last few weeks.
So we're going to make a little venue change. We had a little change of mind here. So here on these lava rocks behind me, you'll see these beautiful lava rocks. Rodri, one of our cameramen on board the ship, he spent last week out with a Darwin leader exploring with the marine iguana. So will we change venue? Jesse, if you want to play the marine iguana video for you, and with any luck, we will be in our new spot, and we will continue with Rakan, executive director of the research station here, and we'll go from there.
I'll make a quick note as we're playing this as well. If you want to see some live marine iguana action all week long, we've been featuring live hits from the field with Joe, the Darwin 200 team, and so many more. You can catch all those on worldsmostexcitingclassroom.com, the Darwin 200 YouTube channel. So if you want to see some live hits with some naturals talking about the marine iguanas, why they're sort of snorting out that salt there, some of their diving habits, what they eat, and more, there's lots to explore and discover on the YouTube channel. So I really encourage you to check that out. So much to see there. Darwin200.com has also been featuring a lot of great stuff, and we've been taking questions and more at classroom at Darwin200.com. I'll leave this video up. When Joe's back queued up, we'll bring him back in and explore a little bit more. Quick note too, while this plays, and I'll put this in the chat for everyone. We made up a special Kahoot about some of the amazing creatures in the Galapagos Islands, the islands themselves, and more. We featured this in a few of our broadcasts over the course of this really special week. So I've just gone ahead and put this in the chat. If you guys want to check out a really cool Kahoot, play along, have a little bit of fun, it's right there for you to explore and discover. We look like we're almost gotten set up back live on the islands with Joe. Pretty exciting to have Sarah Darwin talk about natural selection with us. And again, check out the YouTube channel for so much more. Enjoy the last few minutes, or a last minute here of a clip on marine iguanas, and keep the adventure going in just a minute.
There we go. I think I'm back now. Okay, so we have changed positions. We are ready to switch gears a little bit. There we go, nice and full screen. We've got a little bit of shade here because it was getting a little bit warm down at the beach, but we did our mobile Starlink trick where we all picked up the Starlink together and we made our way to a new location. I'm going to pass off my microphone to our guest. There we go. Let me switch my camera view, and then we are going to be in action. There we go. So, Rakan, it's so great to have you joining us today, Executive Director of the Charles Darwin Research Station. First of all, tell us a little bit about your position. What do you do day in and day out?
Oh, well, I do a little bit of everything, of course. A lot of administration, a lot of management. We're a research station with over 130 staff here, more than 25 different lines of research. So there's a lot going on any given day. So I have my fingers in many different pots, if you will.
All right, absolutely. And so did you originally start in a different position in the station? How long have you been with the research station?
I've been here a little over 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I parachuted in. I wasn't part of the station before. I'm a restoration ecologist by training, more on the plant land of things.
Yeah.
And I've worked basically my whole career in Central America and Latin America doing forest restoration. So, and then I've also been involved with different organizations in leadership roles for field stations and entities similar to the one that we have here. So I think those were the tools of the trade that I brought with me.
Perfect. Well, let's get into a little bit about the station. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about the history, when it began, maybe some of the changes that have happened over the years?
Sure. So the foundation was established essentially at the same time as the Galapagos National Park. I think it's one of the more visionary concepts in conservation. This is 1959, right? So this is a long time ago, and for a state entity alongside some big players in conservation at the time to come up with the idea of protecting almost the entirety of the landmass of the Galapagos Islands is one really forward-thinking concept. Then to establish an organization, which is the National Park, that oversees management of the park, is one piece of that. That's a natural addition. But then the Charles Darwin Foundation was created as a research arm of this partnership. So we're not under the government. We're an individual, private organization, nonprofit organization that helps inform conservation, better conservation practice for the park. And that partnership, that idea of separating these two sort of lines of work in terms of conservation of Galapagos is really very forward thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's get into a few projects here, because research, conservation, education, all very important things that are happening here with the foundation, with the research station. So let's start with a little bit of research. I got to spend a lot of time in the water over the last week. I saw some amazing hammerheads, marine iguanas in the water, the sea lions, the penguins, the sea turtles. So maybe, is there an example of a project in the water that's really exciting happening right now?
There's several. Perhaps the most ambitious one that's currently, we just had a visitor.
A little mockingbird. Yeah.
Yep. Perhaps the most ambitious currently is the Deep Sea program. This is a multi-institutional program to map and research seamounts in the Galapagos Marine Reserve. Last year, that led to the discovery of a deep sea coral reef whose existence was unknown in Galapagos. So that's a major line of research. We also work with many of the emblematic species, marine species of Galapagos. So you mentioned hammerheads, for example. We do a lot of tagging and tracking of these animals in and outside of the marine reserve to understand their movement, their behavior. We monitor other species with very small populations, such as flightless cormorant and penguins, making sure that those populations are stable, alerting authorities if you do have an issue, such as what we had with avian flu earlier on in the year. So we have a number of different research projects in the marine realm.
Yep, excellent. Well, a lot of students study invasive species. That's a topic that comes up in a lot of different grade levels as students are in school. So the Galapagos, we know, has definitely had struggles with invasive species as people visit the islands. Rodents, insects, all kinds of things kind of tag along on shipments of fruit and things like that. So maybe is there an example of a program happening right now? I know there's lots, but maybe kind of an exciting program or a new maybe technique being tried to kind of combat an invasive species.
Sure. So invasive species come in many forms, as you mentioned, rodents, but also plants, insects, and they all play a role in impacting the unique flora and fauna and the ecosystem of Galapagos. So a lot of our projects are focused on addressing invasive species. Yep. Mitigation, just management of these species, but then innovative ideas would be bringing in biocontrol, for example. One example of that is with Philornis, that's the avian vampire fly. This is a fly who part of its life cycle requires a blood meal to complete its life cycle. And that meal comes from young hatchlings of many endemic birds of Galapagos, including Darwin's finches. And so control of that, you can, of course, reduce the infection rate through insecticides and so on, but that's not really a long-term solution. Yeah. You need to understand what's the predator to this introduced species, and that, in this case, a number of other insects, micro wasps in this case, that oviposit or lay their eggs on the pupae of these flies, and then what hatches is another wasp. And so 10 years of research plus 30 or more institutions involved to get to the point where we can safely say, with the best degree of certainty we have today, that introducing such an element into Galapagos is going to have beneficial implications and long-term management and control of this. We did this around 20 years ago with the introduction of a ladybug to deal with an infectious scale that was devastating plants here. Again, a 10-year process to come to the conclusion that you can introduce a biocontrol agent that's safe. Yep. And then address the problem long term. Yep,
absolutely brilliant, because we can point to examples in the past where different places have introduced a species and then that hasn't gone very well. I think cane toads in Australia is a pretty good example of that happening without a lot of research.
Exactly.
So before we move on to a little Q&A, I'm not going to let you go without, you mentioned plant restoration.
Yes.
Kind of being a bit of your background. So we want to talk about that for a second, because we always think about the species, like the animals, the bigger, more charismatic things, but we kind of forget about the plants and the role that they're playing in the ecosystem. So I'm wondering, when you go out into the field and you want to restore an area or bring a species back into an area, what are some challenges you face out in the field trying to restore a section of ecosystem?
It's a great question. So that's restoration, just to start off with, is expensive, right? Reverting and pushing back against a system that's been altered for whatever reason is usually a costly enterprise, especially in insular systems in islands such as Galapagos. So we can tackle animals, it's also expensive, but the plants, the habitat, the matrix within which all of these species exist is often sort of ignored. I'm getting, they're saying yes.
Making themselves known.
This is true, says the mockingbird. So there are actually, unfortunately, thousands of hectares of land that are degraded in Galapagos, mostly due to invasive species. And we know what to do to return that habitat, but what's really needed is large amounts of funding to enact it at scale. If you do just postage stamp areas of restoration, sure, you're maintaining a tiny population of the native plants in the ecosystem, but you're really not tackling the issue that has, a domino effect on all the other species and the web of the community of plants and animals that depend on these native habitats. So that's really what we're doing right now, is looking at how do we take a 1 hectare restoration plot and talk about hundreds of hectares or thousands of hectares. Yeah. And the good news is the world today is very much focused on this, and there's a lot of funding to initiatives that address these needs. And the key here is to plug that in and really be able to tie it to Galapagos, which of course Galapagos has great name appeal, great name recognition. So it's an easy sell from that perspective. The detraction is it's really expensive to work here.
All right. Well, let's get Sarah back in. Sarah, if you want to come in, we're going to go to a little Q&A action now. Yeah. So to those joining us live, we couldn't have a better group here to answer questions about research, conservation in the Galapagos, about Charles Darwin, evolution, plants, the islands in general. So use that chat sidebar. Don't be shy. Send us in some questions. But let's get started, Sarah, with one for you. And someone would like to know more specifically what you studied on your time in the Galapagos.
Oh, thank you so much for asking. So I studied the Galapagos tomato, or tomato, as you say, and it's an endemic. There are 2 endemic species in the Galapagos Islands. I named one of them as new. And there are also 2 introduced species, the tomatoes that we normally eat. And what I was looking to see is, firstly, how many there were, and secondly, how they were interacting together. And as it turns out, they all hybridize, so they can all form these crossbreeds, which of course is one of the aspects, a threat of alien invasive species, is if they can hybridize with the native species, they can kind of dilute, if you like, the integrity of the endemic species. So that was one of the things that I was looking at.
All right. Another fun question here, Sarah, is obviously your great-great-grandfather, Charles Darwin. So this question is, do you think that's kind of maybe led you towards biology, or were you always kind of just fascinated with the natural world?
No, I wasn't always fascinated with the natural world at all. It came as a bit of a surprise when I was in my 20s. Long story, but ended up by living in a tropical rainforest, quite by accident, literally, and had one of these sort of epiphany moments, I think perhaps in a way like Darwin did when he was in the Atlantic forest. Yeah. You know, he had one of these peak experiences, and that changed the course of my life, and I became first did botanical illustration here in the Galapagos, actually nearly 30 years ago, and then I got into botany after that.
All right, we got a couple little station questions here, so I'll shift over with the microphone and the camera. There we go. So first question is, obviously as executive director, pretty busy, so they're wondering, do you get to sneak out and get in the field often?
Oh yes. That's what keeps me ticking. If I was just in the office every day, which is almost true, I would go crazy. So as a matter of fact, I'll be on board for a week after next with the marine invasive species team, doing some monitoring, doing some photogrammetry, some photography underwater, and I'm a terrestrial critter, so it's a learning curve for me.
All right. Well, I hope, are you dive certified?
Dive certified.
Excellent. There's nothing, at least I think there's nothing better than sliding beneath the waves. I love being underwater.
Absolutely.
Okay, another question here. A student here heard there were pink iguanas. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, on Isabella, in the northern part of the island, there's a very range restricted population of iguanas, pink iguanas. We're not an institute that's studying them per se, but others are and are monitoring that population. It's another great example of a very small, restricted population of a species that is constantly vulnerable because you just have that one location where they're present.
Yeah. So one thing that's kind of come up this week, and students kind of cued on this, is they've heard talk about El Nino affecting the islands. So is there maybe an example of a species that's really been impacted by these changes in the water temperature?
Well, Nino and Nina favor different suites of species in Galapagos, and that's part of the magic of Galapagos, is this interplay between sort of cold and warm weather climatic events that favor one subset of species over another. For El Nino, the species that tend to suffer, for example, are marine iguanas.
Yep.
A lot of their food resources are depleted, the abundance of their food resources go down, and you see some very skinny iguanas right now, but we're moving out of El Nino. So hopefully they'll start to recover quickly.
Yeah.
What's more of a concern, to sort of just piggyback on that question, is the frequency and intensity of Nino and Nina events. So Galapagos, much like many other parts of the world, are balanced by what climatological patterns over long periods, and so this up and down cycle here is part of the pattern. But when those intensities start going up and down, are much more severe and more frequent, then you really start scrambling the system, and that's the big concern.
All right. I'm going to steal the microphone from you for just 1 second, because I think this is a fun question to end off on. A student is asking about magic moments in the Galapagos, because it is a pretty special spot. And I know for me, when I think back, the first time I visited Fernandina, and I was standing on the lava beach, and there was a little nest of flightless cormorants, there was a Galapagos hawk sitting in the tree, iguanas on the beach, a bunch of sea turtles floating on the water. Just being surrounded by all that wildlife in that place was pretty amazing. So Sarah, do you have a moment in the Galapagos that's always stuck with you?
Yeah, well, a couple if we've got time. Sure. I did field work on Pinzon. I was very, very lucky to go to this completely deserted island, and we camped there for a few days, and I watched the moon rise on the beach as we were camping, and that was absolutely, completely magical moment. But one thing that might surprise you, and that we haven't really touched on, is the incredible work that you guys do, that the National Park does with the community. And this is something that I think is so special about Galapagos, is that local people love their nature. They are working incredibly hard to protect the nature. There's mass beach clear-ups, there's monitoring of invasive species. There's just an incredible amount of work with local people, and this community thing is really something so important as we go forward with climate change and with the extinction crisis, is to think about forming these knowledge communities that are based on scientific research, they're based on fact, and we can come together and all work together to create a good and healthy future for all living things.
Perfect. Rakan, let's get you to build on that just a little bit, because you've been here 3 years now. And so you've worked at the station with the researchers, the scientists, you've been out in the community. How big of an impact does the community have on the work you do here?
The community's key, right? So more than half our staff are local Galapagos residents. So that's a key component. And part of our work is helping to train and empower the next generation of leaders in Galapagos. I've grown up in the world of ecology from the point where it really was more focused on basic biology and ecology and understanding ecological systems outside of the human dimension. And today we very much understand and accept, whether we like it or not, that we're an integral part of that. And in order to conserve these systems, you have to bring the local community along. You have to engage them. You have to make them understand and appreciate that this is why this place is so special. This is why you have hundreds of thousands of visitors come here a year. This is why everybody knows the name Galapagos the world over. Otherwise, it's just a random set of of islands out there. So it's absolutely critical to engage them. And bring them on board and make them stewards and ambassadors to conservation here.
Okay. And so you've been here a few years now. You must have a moment that stuck with you from being out in the field, something that, yeah.
I have many moments, but I think I'll talk about the subtleties, which is, you know, one of the privileges of being here day in, day out is seeing slight changes and behavioral patterns of animals, of plants, on an ongoing basis. So for 3 years, for example, I walk out from here. This is actually my house back here, where I live, right in front of the beach. I can't complain. And I go past a small population of marine iguanas, and almost every day there's a slight nuance, a slight quirk that I observe with them as I go by. Sometimes they're all in a bundle. Other times they're using a rock as a pillow. Sometimes there's nobody there. Sometimes they're all laid out in some very strange pattern. They're being able to see those nuances and the delicacies, the sort of delicate nature of behavioral patterns of animals like this one right here, doing something rather strange, are really what to me make it magical about having been here for 3 years now.
All right, amazing. Well, I want to start off with a huge shout out to both of you. Sarah, Rakan, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Thank you for introducing us to some of the amazing work the station is doing. Can you maybe hit us with the website? Where can we dig a little bit deeper if we want to learn more about the work the station is doing?
Absolutely. We just renovated our website. Was completely revamped a couple of months ago. So if you just look up Charles Darwin Foundation on Google, it'll pop up.
Yep.
And all of our marine, terrestrial, community-based projects are all listed there with a lot more information, details, ways to get involved as well, to be a volunteer, to potentially look for job opportunities in the future.
To donate, we should say.
And to donate.
Yes,
I was being humble, but
No,
you jumped in, so thank you.
Yeah, donate
And
to
to
this
donate.
fantastic organization.
Thank you.
It's now 65 years old
65
this year.
years this
so
year.
What better time to
Absolutely.
celebrate the work
Absolutely.
you're doing?
Absolutely. And we should stress that too, because in the past we've had students do things like bake sales, popcorn sales. Some students have even made jewelry out of recycled materials and sold them to raise money for different organizations. So doing something like that in the classroom could be a great way to give back to an organization like the Charles Darwin Foundation and give back to the amazing work here at the Charles Darwin Research Station. All right. Well, classes, thank you so much for being with us. It has been an absolute blast doing our live broadcast here in the Galapagos. As I mentioned, we do have one more live event today. We will be at 2:30 Galapagos time on the Oosterschelde. We are going to go live in Spanish. We have some students visiting the ship. We'll have Eduardo on the ship. I believe Sarah's coming back with us. So we'll have a lot to talk about. For now, though, from beautiful Santa Cruz, from the Charles Darwin Research Station and the Charles Darwin Foundation, we're going to sign off. Thanks for being with us today, everyone.